Seems like we have a little bit of a lighter crowd now. I don't know if everyone's out drinking after Edward's presentation, but thank you. As he mentioned, my name is Bridget Barrett, and I'm going to be talking about customer success and different company stages. So we're going to be talking about CS fundamentals in early stage companies, growth stage companies, mature companies, and then how to get from here to there. So just a little bit of an introduction. So again, my name is Bridget Barrett. I'm the VP of Customer Success at Chainalysis. I've spent almost the last 20 years in customer-facing roles across a lot of different industries. So fintech, travel, event management. I've worked at really small organizations of about 30 people, all the way up to 5,000 person public companies. I've worked at really successful organizations. I've worked at some not so successful organizations, and to be honest, I feel like I might have learned a little bit more at some of those not successful organizations. One of the things that I did learn in working across different industries, there are a lot of things that are the same regardless of industry for customer success at different stage organizations. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, and then talk through some of the lessons learned as you grow through those stages and how to grow a CS organization through that. So I broke it into 3 key areas. In the interest of time, we can't focus on everything. So the 3 areas are people and team, customers, and then systems and processes. So people and team. The first thing to keep in mind when you are at an early stage company is to focus on people that are Jack and Jill of all trades. So this might sound a little controversial, but I don't give a shit about people's experience at this stage. I think it's far more important to find people that are very, very motivated by the organization and could get in and just get stuff done. So one of the best hires I've ever made at an organization is somebody that came to me at this stage with 0 relevant experience. But she talked about how excited she was to be there and everything she was going to do to learn, and I hired her on the spot. And I hired her 2 more times after that, and she really excelled in her role. So it's really, really important, particularly at this early stage when every hire counts, to find people that can do a little bit of everything. So speaking of doing a little bit of everything, a lot of times you have to focus on hiring hybrid roles. So I've worked at organizations where you hire people at this early stage where they're doing customer success and sales, or customer success and marketing. And in some extreme cases, in that small organization, customer success and office management. And if you don't have someone that is okay with emptying the dishwasher, they are probably not the right hire at this stage. The third thing to focus on are people that can function in ambiguous environments. So I think a lot of people say they want to work at startups. It's sexy, I get it. The first time I ever worked at a startup, I couldn't shut up about it. I would tell anyone and everyone that would listen. I felt like people that do CrossFit that talk about CrossFit. But what does that really mean? It really means that you are doing 5 people's job with no help. So you have to find people that are okay with that. I also once hired somebody at this stage who had come from a very mature organization, and he talked about how he wanted to roll up his sleeves, get in there, and in his second week, he basically came to me and said, "Which button do I press to automate my QBR?" And I was like, dude, we barely even have a computer for you. So finding people that are aligned to where you are as an organization and that can operate in that ambiguous environment is really important. So segmenting by most important dimensions. There's a lot of things that you can do here, but probably not a lot you'll be able to do at this stage. So focus on what's most important. Is it coverage? Do you need to make sure that you have people in time zones that can operate and respond when you need to? Is it industry level knowledge? Is it language? Do you have key markets that you have to win in where language is going to be a barrier that you need to make sure you hire for? Chances are you're not going to be able to do it all, so pick one and focus on that, and then you can grow the team later. Define a customer feedback process. So it is never too early to make sure you are getting feedback from your customers. Choose something, whatever it is. NPS surveys, spreadsheets, a piece of paper, whatever it is, just make sure you are choosing some way that you can start collecting feedback from your customers. This data is so important, and it helps you make the case to product on what they should be building. But please also keep in mind at this stage, product is in the same boat as everyone else, and they have very limited resources. And one time in an early organization that I worked, I felt like I had done my due diligence. I went to my VP of engineering. I came with one key thing that I wanted him to build. Felt like I was being prudent. I wasn't asking for too much. And I said to him, let's build single sign-on. And he came back to me and said, we could build single sign-on, but the system we have in place right now was designed for 5,000 users. We now have 7,000 users on the system. If I don't focus on building infrastructure, this whole thing is going to fall apart. So my customers probably aren't going to care about single sign-on if they can't log on to their system. And unfortunately, these are the types of trade-offs that you have to make when you're an early-stage company. Focus on tackling your biggest risks. So everyone wants to be proactive. We have talked so much about this, but unfortunately, sometimes during this phase, you just do not have the ability to be proactive. That doesn't mean that you should sit around, wait for your customers to churn. It means you should focus on the thing that is most important. So, do you have low usage? Do you have a lack of relationships? Are there other things that are standing in the way of your success? Whatever it is, prioritize that, start there, and then you can build on. Systems and processes. So you will get a lot of things wrong at this stage, so for perfectionists, it's probably not the right place for you. But one piece of advice that I have here is test manually before investing. So, at one of my early stage companies, we had no money to purchase a CS tool. It just was not in the budget. We could barely hire. So one of the things that I did is I built health scores in a Google Doc. And they were terrible, like absolutely terrible. They were manual. They came from like 5 different sources. I ripped it up a million times. But at the end of it, we recognized that there's so much value in this data that if we could actually get it right and continue to optimize, it's going to make a huge difference for our business. So that gave me the ability to make the case to my organization that this is a priority. Now, I'm definitely not saying do everything manually. Like, that is not the point here. But sometimes you have to prove that it's worth it. Establish the right cross-departmental relationships. So the good thing is, at this stage, you probably know everyone. You could probably tap someone on the shoulder or Slack them to get them to build you something, which is great, but the problem is, again, you're both going to grow, and your teams are going to grow, and this is never going to be viable in the future. So it's really important that you establish these relationships with sales, with product, with engineering at the start, because your relationships with them are going to allow your teams to work better together in the future. Focus on surfacing the data that is most critical for decision making. Data is hard. If anyone has ever worked at an early stage company, this is an absolute luxury. The first time that I went from a very mature organization to a really small company, I asked the question, so where do I get my contraction and expansion information? And the answer was, you look through these emails that we get each week, and you kind of look through your customers in a list, and if you want to see it over time, then you got to look back through those emails. And I was like, oh my God, what did I do? Why did I join this company? But the point being that you're never going to get it all. You're never going to get all the data that you need. So it's important to start with one thing. And for me, that most important thing in this example was getting that expansion and contraction information and building upon that. So that is early stage. Moving on to growth. So the good news here is you usually have the time, or you usually have the bandwidth and the money to differentiate and define roles. You know, the good thing about customer success managers is whenever there is a gray area, they fill that gray area. But the bad thing about that is they end up getting burnt out, and they end up really dissatisfied with their job. So it's really important to start thinking about where you can differentiate their roles. So do you have a very technical product and you need technical resources? You might want to hire a technical onboarding team that could take that off their plate. Do you need commercial help? You might want to hire a renewals team. Chances are you can't do it all, nor do you want to, but it's important to pick something and start building out the team. I think one of the biggest mistakes that I've seen people make during this stage is that they overhire. There's money in the bank, there's a lot of excitement, there's a lot of momentum, there's salespeople everywhere, and you overhire. Unfortunately, we see how that could potentially end, and the winds can very easily change, and you don't want to end up in a down market when you've overhired. So make sure you're being really prudent here. Create a management layer with local and experienced leaders. So this, in the beginning stage, you can sort of wing it, right? You know, we talked about, I mentioned, I don't care about experience. This is the point where you need to build for the future. And you need to find people that can do it well. You need to be able to put people in their roles and allow them to run with it. And the only way that you're going to do that is to find people that are super experienced. One of the other things to consider here as well is getting local talent on the ground. So while you can run a customer success organization in a pinch in APAC from the US, it is definitely not ideal. And you realize pretty quickly, 3 months into 11 p.m. calls, there's not a lot of value. So make sure that you are finding not only experienced managers, but local managers that can really play the right part in those regions. Establish clear and measurable goals for each role. Talented people want to know where they stand. They want to know how they are doing. They want to see how they're doing. They want to know how they're being measured. They want to get to that next role, and they want to see all the ways that they're being measured. You have to put these things in place so that they continue to stay motivated by their role. In the growth stage, retention is so critical. Every hire that you make is so important to hold on to. So making sure that you're establishing measurable goals is super important. Customers. So now is a great time when you can start to introduce additional segmentation. So can you segment by size and region, industry? There's a lot of different ways, again, that you can do it. And now you can probably start doing it a little bit more. So one of the things that we're doing within my current organization is we're splitting it up by region and industry. But the challenge is some of our newer markets, we don't have the ability to split CSMs. So what we're really focusing on, again, the most important from the first stage, putting those people in place, and then as that market grows big enough, you can split it into 2 CSMs by industry. It's a really great way to scale, and it's really working for us. Establish a method for collecting quantitative and qualitative feedback. So in my mind, this is the most important phase for product. They have the team in place, and they also have the agility to be able to act quickly. The best way for product to build what is important to our customers is to let them know what that is. And you know, long gone are the days where you're collecting it in spreadsheets. You need to be able to establish a process for not only collecting it, but consolidating it as well. So now would be a really great time to think about what that is. Is it Jira? Is it product board? Probably not a spreadsheet, but maybe that works for your organization. I will admit, we are going through this process right now. It is very painful, as my team could probably tell you. But it's so, so, so beneficial when you get it right, and it sets you up for future success. And maybe even more importantly, it removes some of the tensions that exist between the teams because you let the data drive your decisions. Build your champions. I love to do this. Love building programs, customer advisory boards, user groups. If you have the help of marketing, it's even better. These are the people that are really going to provide you with the feedback. They are going to be your champions. They are going to be your referrals. They are going to be your case studies. It's really important at this stage to invest in that so they can help you grow. Systems and process. Invest in CS-specific tools and CS operations. So gone are the days where you can duct tape health scores together in a Google Doc. It is now time to make sure you are doing things the right way. We actually just hired someone to focus on CS operations 2 weeks ago, and I am so happy he's here because it makes a huge difference. You have to make sure you're building infrastructure for the future. Sometimes that means taking a step back, and that's okay, but really you need to make sure that you're building things that will sustain. Establish a process for working with other teams. So we talked about this a little bit in the last stage. Last stage, you tap someone on the shoulder, they build it. Can you do that at this stage? Maybe, but you should not do that. What ends up happening there is that you create a situation where you're not thinking about things holistically. You need to figure out a process for how you will work with other teams to make sure you are prioritizing things. And having that system in place that we mentioned in the last piece will really help here. Define what you could temporarily outsource. So this is a challenge that I'm actually working through right now. At a growth stage of an organization, you're going to have a ton of priorities. All of them are mission critical. Some of them you might be able to say, this can wait 6 months, this can wait a year, but sometimes you genuinely have 2 things that have to get done and no way of doing them. So one way that you could solve this problem is to outsource. So I have a challenge right now where I have a training team that is totally overworked. We have so many customers that want to get trained, not enough trainers to do it. But we also have training content that needs to be translated into languages for these trainings. They cannot do both. So what we decided to do was outsource those translations. Now, there are definitely trade-offs for that. It costs money, but sometimes in order to move forward, you need to think about other ways to get what you need. Okay, moving on to mature. This is admittedly my least favorite stage. Now, there are a lot of reasons to embrace this stage. A lot of people like it, but you have to hire people that are comfortable with working within their domain. You can no longer hire the people that love to have their hands in everything. It's just not going to work. They have to be very, very happy with building their function. Continue to differentiate roles and add supporting teams. So at this point, you should have an onboarding team. You should have a renewals team. You might have an escalations team. You might have, a lot of different teams. But that might not be enough. And at one of my larger organizations, we realized communication completely fell apart at this point. Organizations were so big, we had built the right processes, but it still wasn't working. So one of the things that we did was add a team that sat between commercial and product and engineering to help us prioritize. And the good thing about being in a mature phase, mature organization, you have the luxury of being able to do things like that. And again, that can create a lot of efficiency. Ensure CS has a seat at the table. So I think everyone in this room would agree that that is critically important at all stages. but I think it becomes more and more important as you grow. So I've seen organizations where CS reports into revenue, CS reports into operations, CS reports into marketing. I'm not sure what sense that makes, but I've seen it before. But at this point, in order to have a customer-first mentality, you need to make sure you have a voice at the executive leadership level. Customers. So you should have at this point built full segmentation, all differentiated approaches, everything should be running really smoothly. Now is a point where you might want to consider restructuring. And I know, I absolutely cringe in even saying that word. We heard a little bit about this from Scott with his presentation. There could be a segment of the customer success organization that no longer works with what you're doing. They have different processes, you're hiring a different profile, and you might have to spin that out. And that's okay. I would definitely use it sparingly because people don't like this, but sometimes it really helps create efficiency and alignment. Continue to build out the voice of the customer. So, at this point, you should have a lot of feedback, but there could always be more. Think about what you're missing. Is it a specific segment? Is it a specific part of the journey? Is it a specific persona? Focus on that. Again, you have the luxury and the people in place to make these kinds of decisions. And you need to make sure that you're hearing from any and all of your customers. The last thing here is consider introducing a paid success model. Don't underestimate a customer's willingness to pay for better support. I've seen this work time and time again, especially if you're supporting enterprise customers. Think about that and consider adding that as a potentially revenue generating. Systems and processes. So create automation and standardization. Again, at this stage, you kind of have the time to take a little bit of a breath and figure out what you need to improve or what you can standardize. So going back to that example of my person from earlier stage and having their automated QBR deck, now might be the time where you actually can do that thing. And there could be many other things that people are spending their time on that you can slowly start chipping away at. Next thing, optimize process to increase speed. So at one company that I worked at, when I started there, it was about 50 employees. By the time I left, it was about 5,000 employees. One of the undesired consequences of that is that it took our contract approval process from 30 minutes to 7 days. 7 days. And while I probably was not reading a lot of the T's and C's in 30 minutes, and I probably signed a lot of terrible contracts, there is a happy medium. At this point, you need to look through all of the blockers that have built up over time that you can start removing. I, like probably everybody else in this room, is a data nerd. At this point in an organization, you probably have more data than you even know what to do with. You probably have teams focused on data. My advice, use that data. And there's a lot of different ways you can do it. You could be looking at why your most successful companies are so successful. And you can create these types of plans that will make a really big difference at customers of this size, companies of this size. So we talked a lot about those company stages. But if you're doing things right, you are probably not going to stay in that one stage. So how do you get from this early, scrappy, in this case, adorable stage, it's my 6-year-old, by the way, to this wise, mature organization? So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that I learned in going through these company stages. This is by no means a complete list, but just some of the things to keep in mind. Not everyone wants to go from here to there. I said it earlier, I do not like mature organizations. By the time my companies start getting here, I'm already looking. And you should be thinking about that with your team. So, if you are able to have that clear communication with your team, you can prep for it. I've had people that were really high performers that I've helped find roles at other organizations. And you know what? When I went back and worked at another startup, they came back and worked for me again. People like certain stage organizations. Sure, they can adapt, but it's really important to remember. Be honest where you are as a company. If you are an early stage company and you are investing like you are growth and mature, you will fail. I know that is like overly dramatic, but it's true. You just do not have the money to fund the things that you will later on, and it's super important to keep that in mind. Get executive buy-in early and often. Talked about these in a number of sessions, but particularly as you grow, priorities change, new leaders come on board. Do not assume that everybody knows what you're doing and why you're doing it. Make sure you are regularly communicating that to the organization so that you will continue to stay aligned as you grow. Remember, not all regions or segments will mature at the same rate. I made this mistake the first time I launched a team in Europe. I took exactly what we did in the US and brought it into Europe and thought we were going to do okay. We failed miserably. We had already been functioning for 5 years in the US. It was a very different market. It's important to recognize that and pivot accordingly. Last thing, and this is really important because, again, I think this is something that people get wrong a lot, and we've already talked about this a little bit today. Continuously optimize and ruthlessly prioritize. I was talking to one of the directors on my team last week, and we were talking about how we have a laundry list of things we need to do. And even though we were making small, incremental improvements to every one of those things, we were accomplishing nothing. And he told me he took a step back, he focused a couple of weeks on one thing, finished it to completion, did an awesome job, and it felt like we were finally moving forward. This is not human nature to do. We all multitask in our personal lives. We all juggle a million things at once, but you will not move forward unless you have the need, or unless you can prioritize what's important. So I promise, if you take the time, figure out what your top priorities are, finish them to completion, you will see growth and ultimately success within your organization. Thank you.
Awesome job. Cool. So just going to jump right into the Q&A. So when interviewing new hires, what type of questions would you ask to see if they're comfortable with ambiguous situations versus just kind of assuming they are?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think I'm really big on getting examples. So I think it's always good to ask people examples from their past. So if they say something like, it was an ambiguous environment because I felt like I only had 3 of the 5 things that I needed in order to make the right decision. Probably not what you're looking for. You're looking for somebody that's probably navigated some completely unknown situation and can tell you an example of how they've completed that. So it's sometimes hard to tell because, again, people say the right things in interviews, but I find going through some examples are really helpful to be able to identify.
Awesome. Next question, have you ever segmented a success team based on a customer's propensity to buy?
Yes. So I think one of the things to keep in mind as you are segmenting is which of these customers have the ability to grow. If they're never going to grow, you probably don't want to manage them in the same way as if they have upsell opportunities. And that's one of the things that I've done in the past. Just had customers that we knew were just, humming along, and then broke out the ones that we saw as more growth. And that works well, because then you can put someone that's a little bit more commercially focused on some of those customers that you know can grow.
Awesome. And then what activities did you outsource that you felt were a good investment from a time and money perspective?
Yeah, so translations, that's definitely huge. It's so hard, especially when you're growing a huge organization. Language is so important, and it's so hard. It takes so much time, and chances are, again, you're not going to have the bandwidth. So definitely that. Salesforce help. So this is another huge one. A lot of times you do not have the resources internally. You need to get that help. Some of the operations and integration work I've outsourced, and all of that has been like very, very, very valuable.
Cool. And then our last question, how do you go about removing those blockers that build up over time, especially with internal resistance?
Yeah, I think first and foremost, you have to figure out why you have blockers. So you have to put somebody in charge of the project that is going to do the due diligence to explore it in the right ways. And then you have to figure out, identify like maybe what are those top 2 or 3 things, get internal buy-in. Again, don't try and do too much too soon because people don't like change. But I think if you can establish or identify some key things that will make a huge impact, start with 1 or 2 of those and usually build upon that.
Awesome. Let's give it one more round of applause.